Hi everyone, this is the fourth section of the series of the Garden of Eden, and in this section I'll be looking at what happened to the first Garden of Eden. What I'll be doing is reading some fragments out of the Urantia book, and I'll be starting with paper 80, The Adamites Enter Europe. Before the last Andites were driven out of the Euphrates Valley, many of their brethren had entered Europe as adventurers, teachers, traders, and warriors. During the earlier days of the Violet Race, the Mediterranean Trough was protected by the Gibraltar Isthmus and the Sicilian land bridge. Some of man's very early maritime commerce was established on these inland lakes, where Blue Man from the north and the Saharans from the south met Nodites and Adamites from the east. In the eastern trough of the Mediterranean, the Nodites had established one of their most extensive cultures, and from these centres had penetrated somewhat into southern Europe, but more especially into northern Africa. The broad-headed Nodite Antonite Syrians very early introduced pottery and agriculture in connection with their settlements on the slowly rising Nile Delta. They also imported sheep, goats, cattle, and other domestic animals, and brought in greatly improved methods of metalworking, Syria then being the centre of that industry. For more than 30,000 years, Egypt received a steady stream of Mesopotamians, who brought along their art and culture to enrich that of the Nile Valley. But the ingress of large numbers from the Sahara peoples greatly deteriorated the early civilization along the Nile, so that Egypt reached its lowest cultural level since 15,000 years ago. Here's a diagram or a picture or an image of what it looked like back then, around 38,000 years ago. Here we have the Gibraltar Straits, which is closed up, or the Gibraltar Dam. Moving to the east, we've got the Sicilian land bridge, and that bridge created two inland seas, and of course you've got the Black Sea, which extended into the Caspian Sea. Now, this might be reflected, these seas might be reflected in the Book of Jubilees. As for Ham came out of the second portion beyond the Nile toward the south, to the right of the garden, it proceeds to all the fire mountains, and goes toward the west to the Sea of Attal, and goes west until it reaches the Sea of Maok, the one of which everything descends that is destroyed. That to me infers the submergence of the Sicilian land bridge, where water poured into the eastern Mediterranean and destroyed everything that was existent in the basin. Moving on a little further, here's another fragment in the Urantia book in paper 73, and it's subtitled The Fate of Eden. After the first garden was vacated by Adam, it was occupied variously by the Nodites, Kutites, and the Suntites. It later became the dwelling place of the northern Nodites, who opposed cooperation with the Adamites. The peninsula had been overrun by these low-grade Nodites for almost 4,000 years after Adam left the garden, when in connection with the violent activity of the surrounding volcanoes and the submergence of the Sicilian land bridge to Africa, the eastern floor of the Mediterranean Sea sank, carrying down beneath the waters of the whole of the Edenic Peninsula. Concomitant with this vast submergence, the coastline of the eastern Mediterranean was greatly elevated, and this was the end of the most beautiful natural creation that Urantia had ever harboured. The sinking was not sudden, several hundred years being required completely to submerge the entire peninsula. And there's the link. And in this image we see a fault line that extends throughout Italy into the Ionian Sea and throughout Sicily and along what was the Sicilian land bridge. And just imagine the water filling up in this part of the Mediterranean basin, and due to the weight of the water, that would have had some effect on the tectonic plates, and would have affected ultimately the volcanoes existent in that area. Here's another image of the fault line, the same fault line, which runs right throughout North Africa, throughout the Gibraltar Strait, and along into southern Spain. And so, as you can imagine, there was an earthquake at the Gibraltar Dam that created the break. In this image, we see the gouging effect and various waterways of the created through the submergence of the Sicilian land bridge. And here's another image of the old coastline of the Mediterranean basin. And there's Malta, Sicily, and Northern Africa. And you can visualize the submergence of the Sicilian land bridge and the gouging effect in this area. And this is another image of the general area and its fault lines. Here's another section out of the Urantia book, paper 80, Climatic and Geological Changes. About the time of these climatic changes in Africa, England separated from the continent and Denmark arose from the sea, while the Isthmus of Gibraltar, protecting the western basin of the Mediterranean, gave way as a result of an earthquake, quickly raising the inland lake to the level of the Atlantic Ocean. Presently, the Sicilian land bridge submerged, creating one sea of the Mediterranean and connecting it with the Atlantic Ocean. This cataclysm of nature flooded scores of human settlements and occasioned the greatest loss of life by flood in all the world's history. So the Gibraltar break was a considerable event. It seems to me that there was some major tectonic movement occurring at that time, to the point where England separated from the continent. And here's an image of England attached to the continent of Europe. And it must have been around here that that break occurred. This is the old Doggerland section, or part of Europe, which ultimately submerged into the North Sea, and over time Denmark rose. So because of that event, that must have created a lot of pressure on the Gibraltar Isthmus, where a major earthquake occurred, and therefore, or subsequently, broke the dam and flooded the Mediterranean basin. Here's a video that depicts the break of the Gibraltar Dam. So I'll just play it here. As you can see, the Garden of Eden, or Atlantis, which does have connection to the first Garden of Eden. You have Turkey, Syria, and Israel, and the Black Sea, and now we're panning throughout the eastern Mediterranean basin, over the Sicilian land bridge to the Gibraltar Dam. An earthquake occurred to the north and along the fault line that runs through Gibraltar, broke the dam, and the Atlantic Ocean poured into the Mediterranean basin. And so, of course, you can see the submergence of the Sicilian land bridge. Crete, and of course the waters rose up around the old Edenic Peninsula and submerged it. And Cyprus is the remnant. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of what occurred. Here's an image of the Straits of Gibraltar, but dammed up. And this is the break here. Here is an image, a plan view image of the Gibraltar Straits and you know, the surrounding lands, and you know, just consider the pressure that was on that Gibraltar Isthmus, which broke like water coming out of a high dam. And so what a lot of scientists think that this event occurred 5 million years ago, which probably did, but there is some evidence of the Gibraltar Straits closing and opening over time. So in order to verify that this information is accurate regarding the timeline, what we really have to do is a third expedition to the Garden of Eden. We have to perform some drill exploration to get a sample, or to get some samples at different locations of the Edenic city, and work out how old these sediments are, and date them. And also, what we should do is a scan looking under the mud to find the various brick paths and roads that led throughout Eden, and work out the grid pattern of the city. So that's all for this section. Here's some links in the run sheet of that you'll find interesting concerning the Mediterranean, the salinity crisis, and a short movie on the first Garden of Adam and Eve. So I hope you enjoyed that. In the next section, video 5, we'll look at the finer points of Eden at the Acropolis Hill and at the 12 Gates of Eden, and we'll explore that and find out exactly what was created, what was discovered.